e4, d5, e5, d4, d3, knight c6, knight f3, bishop g4, h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, knight takes e5, queen f4, knight g6, queen d2, knight f6, bishop e2, knight d5, short castle, knight e5, c4, knight f6, f4, knight g6, f5, knight h4, g4, queen d6, queen f4, queen c6, queen g5, queen g2 checkmate. d4, d5, e4, d takes e4, knight c3, bishop f5, f3, e takes f3, queen takes f3, bishop c8, bishop e3, knight c6, d5, knight b4, long castle, h5, d6, bishop g4, queen takes b7, bishop takes d1, knight b5, rook c8, d takes e7, queen d7, knight takes a7, rook takes c7, queen b8 check, queen b8, queen takes b4, rook takes a7, bishop takes a7, bishop g4, bishop b6, queen b1 checkmate. d4, e5, d takes e5, f6, e takes f6, knight takes f6, bishop g5, d5, knight f3, bishop e7, knight c3, bishop g4, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, knight takes d5, bishop takes f3, e takes f3, short castle, knight takes f6 check, queen takes f6, bishop c4 check, king h8, short castle, knight c6, b3, rook a d8, queen e2, knight d4, queen e4, rook f e8, queen takes b7, knight takes c2, rook c1, knight a3, queen takes a7, knight takes c4, rook takes c4, rook e7, rook takes c7, rook takes c7, queen takes e7, queen d4, rook e1, queen d1, g3, queen d7, queen c3, h5, queen c2, queen d3, queen b2, queen takes f3, a4, king h7, queen c2 check, g6, b4, queen d5, a5, king h6, a6, rook a8, rook a1, g5, a7, h4, queen c3, h takes g3, queen takes g3, queen b7, queen h3 check, king g6, queen d3 check, king h6, rook a6 check, king h5, queen e2 check, g4, h3, rook takes a7, queen takes g4 checkmate. Knight. Game start. d4, d5, knight c3, bishop e6, knight f3, a6, bishop f4, knight c6, e4, d takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop f5, knight g3, bishop e4, knight takes e4, knight f6, knight takes f6 check, g takes f6, queen d3, queen d5, c4, queen a5 check, bishop d2, queen b6, c5, queen b5, queen takes b5, a takes b5, bishop takes b5, e5, d5, bishop takes c5, d takes c6, short castle, c takes b7, rook a b8, rook c1, bishop e6, bishop e3, rook takes b7, bishop takes b6, rook takes b6, rook c5, king g7, a4, rook c8, short castle, c6, rook fc1, e4, knight d2, e3, f takes e3, rook e8, knight c4, rook b8, rook takes c6, rook e4, rook d1, f5, rook cd6, rook c8, rook 6 d5, king g6, rook d6 check, f6, rook 6 d4, rook e7, rook 1 d3, king g5, h3, h5, g3, rook ce8, bishop takes e8, rook takes e8, h4 check, king g6, knight d6, rook a8, rook d2, rook a5, b3, rook c5, king g2, rook c3, b4, rook takes e3, rook a2, rook b3, a5, rook c3, a6, rook c7, knight b5, rook c8, a7, rook a8, knight c7, rook c8, rook c4, f4, b5, f takes g3, a8 promotes to queen, rook takes a8, knight takes a8, king f5, b6, King e5. b7. f5. b8 promotes to queen check. King d5. Queen c7. f4. Queen c5 check. King e6. Rook s6 check. King d7. Queen a7 check. King d8. Rook d6 check. King e8. Rook c8 checkmate. d4. d5. c4. d takes c4. e3. Queen d5. Knight c3. Queen e6. a4. a6. Bishop takes c4. Queen takes c4. Knight f3. Bishop g4. h3. Bishop takes f3. Queen takes f3. Knight c6. King d2. Knight b4. Queen takes b7. Queen d3 check. King e1. Knight c2 checkmate. d4. d5. Knight c3. Knight c6. Bishop f4. e5. Bishop g3. E takes d4. Knight b5. a6. Knight takes c7 check. King d7. Knight takes a8. b6. Knight c7. Bishop d6. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes g3. F takes g3. Knight f6. Knight f4. g5. Knight h5. Knight takes h5. e3. Queen e8. Queen takes h5. Queen takes e3 check. Knight e2. Queen e4. Queen takes f7 check. King d6. Queen f6 check. King d5. Queen takes h8. Bishop g4. Queen d8 check. King c5. Queen takes g5 check. King c4. b3 check. King b4. a3 checkmate. e4, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, knight f3, h6, c3, knight c6, knight a3, bishop g4, bishop c4, queen e4 check, bishop e2, long castle, d3, queen e6, knight d4, knight takes d4, c takes d4, rook takes d4, short castle, bishop takes e2, queen e1, bishop takes f1, queen takes e6 check, f takes e6, king takes f1, rook takes d3, knight b5, king b8, b3, e5, bishop e2, e4, knight d4, e5, knight e6, bishop d6, knight takes g7, rook h7, knight f5, rook f7, knight e3, bishop c5, knight g4, h5, knight takes e5, rook takes f2 check, king e1, rook d2, bishop c3, rook d2 check, king d1, rook e3, rook c1, rook f1 check, king c2, rook e2 check, king b1, rook takes c1 check, king takes c1, bishop e3 check, king d1, rook takes a2, knight c4, bishop h6, knight e5, rook takes g2, b4, e3, h4, e2 check, king e1, knight f6, knight d3, knight e4, bishop d4, bishop d2 checkmate, d4, knight f6, bishop f4, d6, knight c3, g6, knight f3, bishop g7, e4, bishop g4, e5, d takes e5, d takes e5, Bishop takes f3. Queen takes f3. Knight h5. Queen takes b7. Knight c6. Queen takes c6 check. Queen d7. Bishop b5. Long castle. Bishop a6 check. King b8. Queen b7 checkmate. e4. d5. Knight c3. d4. Knight d5. e6. Knight f4. e5. Knight d5. Bishop e6. Bishop c4. c6. Knight f3. C takes d5. Bishop takes d5. Bishop takes d5. E takes d5. e4. Knight takes d4. Queen takes d5. c3. Knight f6. Short castle. Knight c6. Knight takes c6. Queen takes c6. Rook e1. Bishop c5. d4. Bishop e6. Bishop g5. Short castle. c4. Queen b7. c5. Bishop a5. Rook e2. Queen g4. Bishop takes f6. G takes f6. h3. Queen f4. Queen c2. Rook fe8. Queen a4. Bishop d2. Rook d1. e3. F takes e3. Bishop takes e3 check. King h1. a6. Queen b7. b5. Queen b7. Queen g3. Rook takes e3. Queen takes e3. Rook f1. Queen takes d4. Rook f3. King g7. Rook g3 check. King h8. Queen takes f7. Rook e1 check. King h2. Queen g1 checkmate. d4, d5, knight c3, c6, knight f3, knight f6, e3, bishop f5, bishop d3, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, e6, e4, bishop d6, e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, c takes d5, queen b5 check, knight c6, queen takes b7, short castle, queen takes c6, rook c8, queen a4, rook e8, queen takes a7, e5, c3, e takes d4 check, king f1, d takes e3, b3, c2, queen d4, bishop c5, queen g4, d4, bishop e2, d3, queen takes g7 checkmate, d4, d5, knight c3, bishop f5, f3, h5, e4, d takes e4, f takes e4, bishop g4, bishop e2, bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, queen takes d4, knight f3, queen d8, e5, e6, queen e4, knight c6, bishop g5, bishop e7, bishop f4, g5, bishop e3, knight b4, short castle, f6, a3, knight c6, rook a d1, f5, Queen c4. Queen c8. Queen b5. G4. Knight G5. H4. Queen C4. Knight takes E5. Queen B5 check. Knight C6. Rook Fe1. H3. G3. Knight H6. Bishop F4. Short castle. Knight takes E6. Rook F6. Queen C4. Knight F7. Knight G5. Knight D8. Bishop E5. Rook C6. Rook takes D8 check. Queen takes D8. Queen takes F7 checkmate.